G'day, welcome to the program. I'm David Lipson. A new report from Deloitte Access Economics is suggesting that returning the budget to surplus will be more difficult than first thought, with a blowout to the deficit of some $10 billion in the May budget next year, and that's only from PIFO, which was released during the election. We'll have more on that with Chris Richardson later in the program. Also today, the asylum seeker standoff. And to begin the program, I'm joined now by Parliamentary Secretary Josh Frydenberg in Melbourne. Thanks for your time today. I want to start, first of all, though, with entitlements, because there will be an announcement today from the government on some changes that are going to be made after weeks of pressure.
Well, Minister Ronaldson, the Special Minister of State, will be announcing more details today. But look, we've always said this is a grey area, David. And through some sensible reforms will hopefully strengthen the system. But it's worth pointing out that Labor has been in office for something like nearly 6 years. There were 60 examples where Labor members overclaimed, and they never did anything about it. And it's taken a coalition government today to announce some sensible reforms which will strengthen the system.
But most of the pressure over the past few weeks has been on coalition MPs. Is this change an admission that some of them have taken the mickey, have abused the process somewhat?
I wouldn't say the pressure's just been on the coalition. I mean, Mark Dreyfus had to pay back money for going skiing in Perisher. So, I mean, there are plenty of examples on the other side. It just happens that we are the government.
The weight of the pressure, I would say.
Well, look, David, there have been some examples. There have been some examples on both sides. Well, you know, this system now is going to get some clarification with some sensible reforms that will strengthen the system. And Minister Ronaldson will have more to announce later today.
OK, we'll wait for that to happen. But on the asylum seeker issue, moving on, the standoff with Indonesia over where to send these 60 or so asylum seekers that are floating off the coast of Java. What can you tell us about this?
Well, look, there's an operational discussion taking place between Indonesian and Australian authorities. This boat was 45 nautical miles south of Java within Indonesia's search and rescue zone. The Australian authorities are talking to their Indonesian counterparts, and Scott Morrison is very much on the case. But I must say to your listeners and to your viewers, David, that Operation Sovereign Borders is working. It's been in operation something like just 8 weeks, and since that time there's been a 75% reduction in the boats that have come to Australia, and there was no boats in the last 2 weeks. Now, it's a week-by-week proposition, but this is a significant change in what we saw under the Labor Party. And if we are going to get a long-term solution to this issue, we need good cooperation from Indonesia. And it was important to see Prime Minister Abbott with President Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono soon after Tony Abbott got sworn in, discussing how they can work together. And, you know, SBY said in that joint press conference that they did together that both Australia and Indonesia are victims of people smuggling rackets. And the only way forward to find a solution is through cooperation. They're not Australia's words, that's the Indonesian President's words. And I think that's a sign that we can really work well, effectively together to solve this problem.
Sure, but that doesn't seem to be happening right now. You say it's an operational discussion. Indonesia has made clear that it does not want to accept these asylum seekers because they're not in any imminent danger. Now, your policy is to turn back the boats where safe to do so. It seems safe to do so here, yet they're not being turned back. Is that still your policy?
Well, I'm not going to get into the details of what specifically happened in that case, David, other than to say we do cooperate effectively with our Indonesian counterparts. It's in both countries' interest to do so. In this case, this boat was 45 nautical miles south of Java within Indonesia's search and rescue zone. So there is some constructive discussions going on behind the scenes, which, you know, Scott Morrison has already detailed.
But while that's happening, there are 60 asylum seekers floating at sea. They say they're in distress, and there's no known destination for them. Look,
as I said, that issue is being worked out between the authorities from both Indonesia and Australia. But the bottom line here is we can only deal successfully with this issue with good bilateral cooperation. And President Yudhoyono, in his joint press conference with Prime Minister Abbott, made it very clear that both Indonesia and Australia are the victims of people smuggling, and the only way forward is cooperation. And both countries know that. We've already had some success with Operation Sovereign Borders. There's a long way to go, but we are moving in the right direction.
The opposition says that the coalition has set about trashing the relationship with Indonesia since it took government. What's your response to that?
Well, of course they would say that, because they completely took the eye off the ball with our relationship with Indonesia. You know, John Howard, when he was in government, David, dealt with 5 different Indonesian presidents and really developed a fantastic working relationship, particularly with President Yudhoyono. That's going to be continued under the Prime Ministership of Tony Abbott. Look, there's going to be an election in Indonesia next year. That will lead to a change in leadership because President Yudhoyono is stepping down after 2 terms. But, you know, we've already moved, for example, on the live animal export issue to resolve that diplomatic spat which was caused by the Labor government and cost Australia thousands of jobs and, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars in export revenue. We are moving on a number of fronts to strengthen the relationship, and I think Tony Abbott and Julie Bishop both will handle this relationship extremely well and continue in the vein that John Howard left and Alexander Downer left after their nearly 12 years in office.
Okay, well, looking at the budget, and we'll have more on this with Chris Richardson later in the program, but the report from Deloitte Access Economics says that it is going to be more difficult to return to surplus than expected, that the budget deficit will hit about $40 billion next year, which is $10 billion more than what was suggested during PIFO just a couple of months ago. What's the government's response? This is going to be tough, isn't it?
Well, there's no surprises there, and, you know, I congratulate Chris Richardson and Deloitte for their work in this area. But we are going to face some, you know, cold economic winds. If you look what's happening in the United States, if you look what's happening in Europe, we're very vulnerable to what happens in China. All that is creating some international economic uncertainty, and that has an impact in Australia. But we were bequeathed by Labor, David, a fiscal nightmare. They left us $300 billion of debt. That's costing the Australian taxpayer about $10 billion plus every year in just interest payments. So we know that we've got to cut spending, and that's going to be difficult. We know we need to boost productivity, and one of the ways we can do that is getting more efficient taxes and getting rid of the carbon tax and the mining tax, but also cutting some of the 21,000 additional regulations Labor left us. But we have a different philosophical approach when it comes to the economy, David, because we don't believe it is government that creates jobs and real wealth. It is business that creates jobs and real wealth. So we want the government to get out of the way and allow business to do what they do best, which is to employ people and create wealth for the country.
The government's also shedding public service jobs, as it said it would do, all the way up to and including in the election. But part of that is the sacking of non-ongoing public service workers when their contracts expire. I thought natural attrition was really about when workers wanted to go, when they decided that it was time to finish up.
Well, look, the public service just became extremely bloated and top-heavy under the Labor government. I mean, some 20,000 new public servants came onto the system, and, you know, that's a huge burden for the Australian taxpayer. So we said, as you rightly pointed out, David, in the lead-up to the election, let's trim down the public service to make it more efficient, more effective, and obviously less of a cost burden on the Australian taxpayer. And that will involve attrition, and that will involve some of these people on contracts. But as for particular agencies...
But you didn't say that before the election. You only mentioned natural attrition.
But what we said, David, is that headline number of, you know, around 12,000 public servants would go over time. And let's get to that number. Let's save the money. And you can't have the Labor Party saying, well, you're not cutting enough, you're not saving enough, and then to criticise us when we make some sensible cuts to the size of the public service. You can't have it both ways.
OK, we're out of time. Josh Frydenberg, thanks very much for your time.
Nice to be with you, David. Thank you.
After the break, we'll speak to Andrew Lee.